Good morning, YouTube. What's going on? It's your man Army Vet Collection here with another video, another episode in my YouTube web series titled "What Do You Collect?" Today's series is going to be on baseball cards, and I'm going to attempt to provide some clarity on a topic that I know many of you out there in the collect world have struggled with, and it's how to identify the distinguishing marks between 1990 Major League Baseball card series Topps versus Topps Tiffany. Now, what I have is three examples of a couple of cards where one is Topps and one is Topps Tiffany. And I'm going to attempt to show the different variations between the borders and the ink and maybe the nameplates to try to help some of you identify this, because I've struggled with this for the last few years as the junk wax era cards are starting to become a mainstay and a focal point of the new surge in card collecting. So with that being said, let's start out with good player in his day, hometown hero for me, being that I'm from Georgia, Ron Gant. Now, what you'll see here is I have two examples of Ron Gant cards, right? And the card is card number 567, 1990. And if you'll notice when you look at these cards, if you were to hold them up one by one, it'd be pretty hard to identify which is which. And this is something that I've been researching for a while, and I just could not do it without having the two cards side by side. So let's start out with holding them side by side to see if you can actually identify between the two. So with the cards side by side, you'll notice that it even then is still kind of tricky to identify them. So let's try this. I'm going to hold the cards up one on top of the other, and I'm going to capture slight differences in the borders to try to let you see that the main difference in identifying these cards is clarity and the amount of ink used in the detailing. So with this view here, I want you to take a look at Ron Gant's face, and you'll notice that when looking at both cards, the card on the left has a little bit more facial detail, and it's easier to recognize the different features of his face because it's got more ink in the overlay. The card on the right does not. Side by side view as I edge them closer to try to let you see the slight variations. The card on the left has a little bit more color and a little bit more detail. It makes identifying him a little bit easier. Also, take note of the Atlanta Braves hat. The card on the left, the hat is much more blue. It has much more detail than the one on the right. Take a look at the nameplate. The card on the left, the nameplate is much darker. The one on the right is a little lighter. Now I'm going to give you the most obvious difference in these cards when looking at the front as I hold them side by side. With these cards side by side, I want you to take a look at the outer border right there where my finger is going up and down motion. If you'll notice, the one on the back is much more red. That's because they use a lot more ink on the Tiffany versions, a lot more ink. That makes identifying this card pretty easy when you have two examples side by side, one Tiffany and one standard Topps. Now, looking at the pink, you can kind of see it a little bit different, but it's a little harder when you don't have them side by side. But when you have these cards side by side, let the camera get back in focus, you can clearly see that the Tiffany on the back is much more red, much more. And in terms of identifying these, it's very difficult to do when you don't have two examples side by side. And as you can tell, when you hold them up together, it's a lot easier to tell the difference. Now, the back is a little bit harder because I just simply couldn't do it without them being side by side. But if you do it with them together, take note, you can easily see that the card on the bottom has much more ink on the nameplate portion of the card versus the one on the top. So with them together, you can clearly see which one is the Tiffany. Now, it took me a while to come up with this until I just simply went out and collected types of both and put them side by side as another YouTube influencer suggested doing. And once I was able to do that, then it became clear which was which. It's definitely easy to see when you hold them side by side. So I decided to do my installment today to help other people get this challenging task and provide a little bit of clarity in helping people to identify this as, like I said, this junk wax era is starting to come back into the forefront of collecting. And that is how you can identify between the two with Ron Gant's card. So let's try another example and see if my example works, or my theory on how to identify the two. So we'll go with this Sammy Sosa. Again, same thing, holding them side by side. Definitely hard to tell. You couldn't just walk up and pick one out from the other. But if you put them together and you start to look at the certain differences, like starting with the nameplate, you can clearly see that one has a lot more ink. It's so visible that it's almost too easy to do when they're side by side. It's like it's no question which is which, because you see much more ink, much more color on the borders, much more detail in the facial area, much more just ink and vibrant color just pops out on the Tiffany versus the regular. Again, look at the facial features. You'll notice that there's a lot more color, a lot more detail, a lot more of the actual natural skin tone look on the Tiffany versus the regular. And then I point again to holding them side by side and then looking at that border where that red is. I mean, look at the difference. One almost looks orange and the other looks red. So it becomes very clear to see when you hold them together the difference in identifying these cards. Look at that green, how light one is versus how dark the other is. Look at them side by side. Look at the blue on this one. Look at the lighter blue there. Look at that detail. So it's very easy to see when you hold them side by side that there's a big difference in the amount of ink used on one versus the other. Now let's try the nameplates. Look at those nameplates. Clearly, the one on the top is darker. The ink on the name is much more permanent looking. It's almost like a permanent marker tone on the name Sosa on the one on the top versus the one on the bottom. So again, let's look at the back and see. You hold them to the back. Move it around, let the camera get in focus. You can clearly see that the one on the bottom has much more ink on the name plate, the identifier. Much more ink. So again, this is how you can tell the difference between the regular and the Tiffany when you have two examples side by side, because I swear to you, I could not do it with them without them being together. The regular version and the Tiffany. And then for the final, I got two examples of Will Clark cards. Another one of those great players in his era. One at a time. I mean, honestly, could you tell which was which? I could not tell the difference. And I know a lot of you that view this are going to say, oh, well, it's easy to tell the Tiffany, or you're going to say, I can't do it either. But I'm telling you, get two examples, put them side by side, and when you do that, it becomes very easy to tell which is which. I mean, start out with the face when you put them together. One of the faces is much more clear, much more detailed, much more close to the natural skin tone of the athlete. Much more clear. Then you go into your edges. You can clearly see that the greens, lighter, darker, and the purples, lighter, darker. Now, on the Will Clark card, this one has one feature that is a dead giveaway. It is much more easy to identify than even on the Sosa or the Gant, and that's the outer border. Look at how that outer border there is like a light gray almost in tone, almost like a lead, pencil lead light gray. And that border on the second one is a dark gray, almost like a charcoal gray. That one is super easy to identify on this card. So that is why my method of putting them side by side and starting with the nameplates, the faces, and the outer borders gives it away easily. It's no question that the regular Topps is lighter and doesn't use nearly as much ink as the Tiffany on the back. And then with the facial features, you can clearly see the Tiffany has a lot more detail than the regular Topps. Nameplates. Again, the regular Topps on the top, the nameplate is much lighter. The nameplate on the back is much darker. You can see that the name and the ink is a lot more clear. A lot more clear. It's much, much more clear. Now, I'm hoping that my explanation and how to identify between the regular Topps and the Topps Tiffany help somebody out there, as you know, several other YouTube influencers helped me. You know, it took me a while to be able to identify it, but you're talking in terms of collecting a big difference in value when you can provide proof that your Topps is a Topps Tiffany and it's in good condition. And if you go that step further in getting it graded or purchasing the graded ones, it'll help you to identify when someone is trying to scam you into buying a card that is not truly a Tiffany. But side by side, it is almost impossible to not be able to tell the difference. I mean, it just jumps out at you so vividly. I mean, look at that border. The one on the top is light gray versus the charcoal gray one on the back. So again, that is my example of how to tell which is which for the Topps versus Topps Tiffany series cards. Now, before I get out of here, YouTube, I just want to touch on a couple more cards that I'll be doing video installments on in the near future. If you'll pay attention to the backdrop, you'll notice I got the Michael Jordan upper deck. That's known as his rookie card from where he stepped out of the NBA for a season back in the mid-90s. And then you'll notice the Roger Maris in the center. Another one of those cards that was on my list of collecting for a while. I'd definitely like to get my hands on some of his earlier cards, but for now, you know, that was the first one that I was able to attain. And then the Bo Jackson Don Russ rated rookie. So I'll be doing videos on those a little bit later. And I hope that you stay with me. I hope that you enjoy the content that I provide. You know, I've been advised to start saying, please like my videos, hit that button, and subscribe because it helps with the YouTube algorithm. So until next time, this is Army Vet Collect saying out of here. Enjoy your collecting, stay safe, and again, trying to identify these cards without having examples side by side is definitely hard to do. But enjoy collecting, and I'll see you next time.